say that I think the Rutgers situation created a space where we can actually. No, we're good. We're on theme. We got a plan. The Mike Rice Rutgers situation created a space to talk about some things that weren't getting talked about. Somebody once said a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and I think it's unfortunate that kind of thing happened. It's fortunate that it came out. Grateful to Ron and Isle and Syracuse, SU for giving us the opportunity to talk about this. We're going to try to do this as a conversation, not separate speeches. And I have to say that I am absolutely thrilled to be on the same stage with Jack Clark. I know lots and lots of very elite, successful coaches. I don't think there's anybody in the country that knows as much about how to build a strong team culture and has thought as deeply about it. And we had about a 10-minute conversation earlier in the week preparing for this, and it's just so much. You're gonna love to hear from Jack, and I'm grateful to be here to add my 2 cents.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Dan. Thanks for the introduction. It's my pleasure as well to be here and to share the dais with Jim. He's made a big impact on my coaching, so it's very personal to me, and I thank the PCA and Jim for what they do. And it's interesting when you just reflect on how many important individuals there are, if you will, in the sports business, in the sports industry. All those media executives that decide, what sport lives and what sport doesn't, and wealthy owners and commissioners and all that. But I happen to believe that Jim Thompson is the most important individual that we have in U.S. sports. And when I see all these really bright people up here talking about we need to change the culture if we're going to change problems, this is the guy right here to my immediate left which changes culture. So maybe it's just the body of his work. Possibly it's the time and place that we're in right now, but we've never needed the PCA more than we do right now. So very pleased to be here. I think before we get started, it might make some sense to just refresh our minds by watching a brief clip of Mike Rice coaching.
That's gone viral in the last 24 hours. Rutgers head basketball coach Mike Rice firing balls at his players in practice and engaging in what some would consider physical abuse. When Rutgers officials saw video examples like this last December, they suspended Rice for 3 games and fined him $50,000. When you heard what the punishment was.
So, Jack, let me start.
This is the video that's gone viral.
Let me start by asking you, as a coach, what was your reaction when you saw this video clip for the first time?
You'll notice I didn't try to look over my shoulder. I kind of had to at one point there. It's pretty difficult to look at if you've seen those images, and I'm sure some of you have. I'm an evidence-based coach. I don't play a lot out of my guts. I really want to know. I want to know what the data is. And when you look at that video evidence, it's abusive. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It's abuse from a position of power, which I suppose makes it that much worse. Scholarship athletes, this is their opportunity. You can't take on the coach, maybe. Lucky for him, by the way. And I guess I just find it to be obviously that, in the full clip there was a lot of pushing and shoving, and we were slinging some balls at athletes, and so there was something physical in all that, but it's really, the scar tissue that I see is more mental, and it's very, very difficult to describe that in any way other than abusive. And then, Jim, the very next thought I had was that just made my job harder. Because in a high-performance culture, everything matters, a lot of really direct conversation that goes back and forth. You get 20 hours a week with athletes. I mean, there's not enough time to have a lot of individual conversations. A lot of this is on the run, very direct, without a lot of filter to it. And that line that was crossed, that should never have been crossed, and was crossed by a million miles there, is going to get redrawn. And unfortunately, it doesn't need to probably get redrawn. It just needs to be enforced. So as you redraw those lines, I think it becomes harder to get people from where they are to where they want to be. And that's what coaches do. So the job got harder. Tell me, Jim, I mean, what was your reaction?
The word that came to mind immediately was disdain, how much disdain Mike Bryce had for his players. I noticed that when he threw balls at their legs, I grew up playing dodgeball, and there's a spot on your, just below your shin, where if you can hit the ball there, the person can't get away from it. And he was aiming the ball at the weakest point of the player. But my biggest reaction was, this is not how you get the best out of athletes. And if you look at his record, he did not have a good record. We have a model we call the double goal coach. First goal, I travel around the country and I say, I'm from Northern California, I really like granola, but I'm really a pretty competitive guy. And winning is a good thing, trying to win. So the first goal of a double goal coach is preparing your team to win on the scoreboard. The second, more important goal is to use sports to teach life lessons. He failed on both counts, just really amazingly. And the other side, Jack, is I think of you as a really tough person, a really strong person. And I think there's a misconception that toughness is about getting angry and losing control. I don't know Mike Bryce at all, so I'm not going to comment on him as a person, but the behavior he showed was not toughness, it was weakness. Weakness because he couldn't control his emotions or his behavior. And real toughness is controlling your emotions and controlling your behavior when it's really hard to do it, so you can give your players what they need. And Jack's from Cal, and one of my favorite coaches is the Cal women's basketball coach, Lindsay Gottlieb. There was a moment in the Final Four when Cal was playing Louisville, and her point guard, Brittany Boyd, came down twice in a row and threw the ball away. I would say not bad passes, really terrible passes. And the second time she threw the ball away, remember this is the Final Four, she turned to Coach Gottlieb, and Coach Gottlieb showed real toughness. She said, it's okay, you're good. The Louisville got the ball, and Cal got it back, and the next time down the floor, Brittany Boyd made a three. Now, that is toughness, controlling your emotion. I'm sure Lindsay Gottlieb wasn't saying, oh, I love you so much, I don't care if you throw the ball away. But the way she acted showed that kind of toughness, and that's the example of toughness. Jack, I think for a lot of people, it seems really far-fetched that someone like Mike Bryce could get away with doing that. Why was it allowed to occur?
I think that you can almost divide your thoughts into two areas. I mean, a lot of what a basketball coach would do would be very public, wouldn't it? Be during competitions, television cameras, a lot of people, and I think, he got teed up a lot, got kicked out of some games, and I think that if some of us would see that as being completely out of control publicly. Others would say it's passionate, he cares, he wants to win. That loss of self-control can be, he lost his poise or he was just defending his players. I guess what I'm suggesting is that from a public standpoint, it gets a little bit subjective. It gets just a little bit subjective. But what's damning, of course, is when you go out of the public and you go very private into a closed-door basketball session where, he's the ruler of all things. He decides what conduct is becoming and not so. He decides what behavior is acceptable. And in that context, it's horrendous, right? Because now, as I said before, you're using your power, and you're outside of the public, and there's nothing about that that can be defended. I think what aids all of this is a norm within certainly collegiate sport, where the coach is the subject matter expert on their sport, and therefore there's very, very little supervision. Now, hold on, coaches get fired at the drop of a hat, right? I mean, so, there is this, mark-to-market aspect of coaching where your win-loss record and maybe a few other markers become all important. But the fact is that it's not the norm that supervisors would go supervise the coach where all the volume is. In that 20 hours a week, most of that volume is in meetings and practice time, maybe in other kind of development prep like the weight room. And there's no one there typically to supervise. So it allows, in this case, abusive behavior to just, like somebody, poured kerosene on it. I mean, it gets out of control. So there's a case to be made that we have to do a better job of not redrawing lines, but of supervising coaches. And I would say there's a million reasons to do that beyond abuse. I get to work with a lot of coaches, and I get to travel around and work with athletic departments and individual coaches. And it'd be quite often, you go out and watch a coach, and some of you are parents in the room. I mean, you know all about motor learning skill. You know that you have to explain the aims of the activity. You might have to offer demonstration. You know for a fact that you have to progressively rep that activity under escalating pressure. And then when it's over, you'd have to put a summary around that for this to be a real learning experience before you move on to the next activity. Well, I see coaches all the time that jump right into the middle of the alphabet there. I can tell you all the time, I'll go out and I'll see two coaches. The drill on the right exits this way, and the drill on the other side exits that way, and we're lucky we're not running kids into one another because we're not smart enough to put the cones in opposite directions. So whether it's risk management, whether it's any other element, we need better supervision of our coaches. And I see that as part of the answer. Jim, again, what's your thoughts on why this is allowed to happen?
Well, I think your comment about a coach being a subject matter expert, we work with a lot of schools, not so many colleges, but a lot of high schools, youth sports organizations, and there aren't not many athletic directors who are competent across a whole bunch of different sports. So you've got somebody who is the subject matter expert. But you said to me last week when we talked that part of coaching is asking questions. So if an athletic director is in that gym and sees that kind of behavior, you could ask a question like, is this working? Coach, is this giving you the results you want? So you don't have to know everything about the X's and O's in a sport to be able to supervise. I think part of it is that the role of coach is it's a special role. And you said lines are going to be drawn differently. Coaches get some leeway that math teachers don't get. And if they abuse that leeway by this kind of behavior, then that leeway is going to be taken away from them. You said earlier, it's coach's job, and you talked about it's going to be harder to really work hard with coach hard players to get them where they want to go. And that reminded me of the derivation of the word coach, which comes from like stage coaches. And the definition of coach came from a coach is a vehicle for taking a very important person, because in those days, not everybody got to ride in coaches, only rich people did. So a coach is a vehicle for taking a very important person from where he or she is to where he or she wants to go. I think that's a wonderful definition. The other definition of coach I like is a coach is somebody who gets extraordinary performance out of ordinary people, and over time makes ordinary people into extraordinary people. I think that one of my first questions when I saw this was, did the athletic director or the president, did any administrator at Rutgers ever tell Mike Rice what they wanted? And again, going back to this double goal idea, we want to win on the scoreboard, and we want the people coming out of this program to be great citizens who are going to reflect well on the university. And my guess is that that nobody ever told them that. It's like, you're the coach now, go and do your thing. Jack, how do we keep this from happening again?
Yeah, I think some of this stuff obviously slides together. Right? I think you can talk about supervision again right here, but moreover, it's about creating organizational principles and values, real. I mean, not the corporate stuff that we're going to see on every PowerPoint that every university in the land has, but really ingrained organizational beliefs. Which this is how we do things. This is not how we do things, and the coach is going to have their domain, but that domain does not allow them to get outside of what is clearly best practice and get abused to. So it's about getting rid of all this subjective thing about the coach's personality, their fiery nature, and we've got to get beyond all of that. This has to be about coaching education. I was asked, by the way, just in the gentleman's room, I was asked as I was washing my hands, I was asked, hey, what's happened at universities, since Rutgers? Nothing. Zero. We haven't had anything more. There hasn't been this is a great wake-up call for us to put some serious coach education around this. So organizational principles, coach education, hard policy on these kind of issues, and obviously, the supervisors, getting, compliance important, sure, yeah, we got to stay on the right side of that. The budget, well, we can't blow the budget, we got that, but we have to get in the middle of supervision of coaches during those non-public times. Jim, there has to be a big effect when this happens and it's on the news. How do examples like this, affect, the work that the PCA does at the youth and the high school level where you do your work?
Yeah, you mentioned about not much happening at the college level. Last night, we actually had a trainer in New Haven at Yale University doing a session with Tom Beckett, who is the athletic director there. Brought one of our trainers in to do a session with the coaches, and it went just fabulously. He's trying to set a culture of the way, and that's what culture is the way we do things here. He's trying to establish a culture for Yale University sports that would never allow something like the Mike Rice thing to happen. I love what Alan Schwartz said earlier. He said he put this in an article and it got edited out. He said the head of the serpent moves long before the tail does. And professional sports, college sports, in some ways are the head of the serpent. Every single youth coach, every single youth athlete is a fan of professional sports and of college sports. So what happens there has an incredible impact on youth sports. One of the things that I really liked about this whole thing is there were almost nobody defending Mike Rice. It was like, this behavior is out of bounds. And every once in a while, if you look at blogs and stuff, there'd be some comments, and one guy would say, American kids are getting to be so wimpy, and they should be able to take that. But generally, it's like, this is not what we want to have in youth sports. We have a concept we call high school and youth sports as a development zone. It's not just about winning. It's not winning as everything or the only thing. It's about a development zone where you develop better athletes, better people. And trying to win, coaching kids to be their best is part of that development zone. The great thing about sports is it's not easy. There's a competitor. You gotta get yourself knocked down. You gotta get up again. Things that don't typically happen in the regular classroom. I actually think that this whole thing is reverberating in a positive way for youth sports. And the the culture. One of the other things I want to talk about is just a triple impact competitor. We talk about double goal coaches, first goal winning, second more important goal teaching life lessons through sports. And double goal coaches produce triple impact competitors. Competitors who make themselves better, their teammates better, and the game better by the way they compete. So that's our goal. We want to make youth sports and high school sports a development zone in which double goal coaches produce triple impact competitors who go on to become great citizens, positive contributors, ethical leaders that our society so desperately needs. I think we're really making some momentum there. We've got some incredible supporters from elite sports. Brandon Chastain, who's going to be up here in a little bit, Ronnie Lott, Jerry Smith, who's the soccer coach here. We've got a lot of people involved. You yourself, Jack. Jack went to one of our workshops many years ago. I don't know how you got there, because it wasn't for college coaches, but Jack called me up and he said, if I go to a 2-hour workshop and I get one idea that will make me a better coach, that was time well spent, and I got 2 ideas from your workshop. And then you sent 100 or so letters to everybody involved with rugby, which is why we have a partnership with USA Rugby. So you're a real leader. Let's open this up. We've got a little time here, and so if you have a really strong voice and you have a question you want to ask about this or anything we talked about, shout it out. Yes, sir.
Yeah, interesting presentation. You said what's happened since then. And I'd like to get into the water supply. One thing that has happened since Rutgers. University of Utah swim coach Greg Winslow, who probably very few people here have even heard of, who was fired shortly after Mike Rice, and frankly made Mike Rice look like Mr. Rogers by comparison. He was a sexual abuser. He physically abused his athletes, and his actions were covered up by the Utah administration for 5 or 6 years. Thank you.
And the upshot was that there was an independent investigation that said he should have been fired a year earlier for being an alcoholic. And that was the end of it. The athletic director at the University of Utah survived, and as I said, nobody even knows that.
Thank you for sharing that. So David Jacobson, who got ground-rounded by Ronnie Lott to be a concussion demo target, is going to help us here with the microphone. Yes?
So I believe we know about Rutgers because somebody filmed it surreptitiously. So what do you think about filming? Because it is hard as a supervisor to cover all the sports. Dan knows this. So what do you think about that? Would that alter the behavior of coaching or kids in a way that's not productive?
Well, I'm a little concerned about redrawing the line. I think that it's possible to capture things on videotape out of context. I would just, there's enough attorneys in the room that can probably argue that point for us, but I think it's dangerous. I mean, one of the things that happens in coaching is, in that case, there's 15 players on a court. Let's say it's a great coach like Tara working with 15 athletes. You can't wait to let each athlete make the same mistake and have a quiet word with them. It's just not practical. By the time of their matriculation from Stanford University, they haven't learned enough lessons. You haven't done your job. You have failed them. So what happens is you group coach. I mean, you've got to make an example out of people. Now, you don't mean to make an example out of them. You want to make an example out of the performance. And many times, the example you're making is you're giving them a lot of love because it was a beautiful moment of great hustle and maybe really an unselfish pass possibly. And you're trying to reinforce that attitude as that's what we want here. But a lot of times, you're commenting on, in a group fashion, a lack of effort. And, what happens when you do that? Well, that person drops their head, they feel bad, it's a bad moment for them. As everyone learns that lesson in a group setting, I think it's possible that you can take a clip of that, and that can look pretty bad for the coach, when in reality, probably just doing their job, maybe, right? I mean, I don't, you know, let's just enforce what we know to be true. I mean, we crossed all kinds of bright lines right there, you know. Probably can't walk up and shove somebody. You probably can't, you know, throw balls at people. You can't do any of that stuff. And you can't say things to them that are abusive, which I think is even the bigger crime. So do you put surveillance cameras, if I understand it right, you know, on practices? I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense. Most teams video their own practices. You could just ask for maybe to review those. You could stop by and take a look at it. I think it's important for supervisors to get dug in and use their expertise, maybe not in a sports-specific way, but in an overall way of, hey, I'm an expert in how we do things here, and I just want to make sure you're doing things the way we're all doing things.
Hi, thank you so much. My question regards the master of the domain power that a coach has, and how, as a coach or a leader, do you create the institutional culture where that power still exists and is necessary, but also allows a player to have an agency to say, you know, I'm uncomfortable here. My basic human needs are being not met. I mean, how do you create that institutional sweet spot?
Well, I'll take that first. I'd love to hear what you have to say too, Jack. Our model of the triple impact competitor, someone who makes himself better, makes her teammates better, makes the game better. We talked about leadership. Leadership is not telling people what to do. It's making the people around you better. And Jack, the first time I heard Jack speak, he came over to Stanford and gave a talk to all of our trainers, and we actually incorporated this quote into our workshop. He said, on our team, every player has to have some leadership. And by that, he meant making the people around you better. So if you establish your culture, if your culture is, I'm the boss, you do exactly what I tell you, that team is going nowhere. If you got people waiting for the official leader to tell you what to do, that organization, that team is not going anywhere. When you establish a culture that I expect every one of you to be looking around, you're trying to get to be as good as you can be, and you're also trying to help your teammates get better. And the really confident leaders, even, you've heard of 360 evaluations, 360 degrees, the really confident leaders even ask the people that they supervise, you know, how am I doing? How can I get better? Do you have any other thoughts?
I just can't believe that that a coach would be challenged. I mean, not a coach you want, that would be challenged by somebody, you know, suggesting that their methods aren't working, suggesting that their best can be better, that their methods can be better. I find it hard to believe that if a coach is that protective of their domain, that protective, to where they don't believe anyone can tell them anything about how it is that they're coaching, what their methods are, whether it's player development or whether it's their actual coaching, then that's a problem, right? Now, I think if the coach says, listen, my systems, my strategies, how I implement tactics, you know, how I assess opponents and build game plans, well, you know, that probably is going to stay to their domain, and ultimately their win-loss record is their report card. But I think you just separate those things is what I would do.
Well, at Positive Coach Lines, we have a set of values, and one of our values, which we call it the PCA way, because I used to work for Hewlett Packard, and Hewlett Packard famously developed the HP way. One of the elements of the PCA way is what we call debate and commit rather than smooth and avoid. So we tell people, if you are the lowest level person in the organization, and you've only been here for 2 or 3 days, and you see something you don't understand or something you think is wrong, you have a responsibility to talk about it. Now, you don't have the ability to talk about it forever. We debate, and then we commit. And maybe the decision we're making is not the best decision right now, but we've talked it through, and it's part of our culture now for people who feel strongly and who have the opportunities to say their point of view, to say, okay, I feel like I've been heard, I haven't convinced anybody, so let's go do this. Is there another question out there? Yes. I think you're going to need to get a mic. To Alicia, right?
Yes, Elise. Coach Clark, let's bring back concussions for a second also. What has changed in rugby to ameliorate potential effect of concussions? The NFL obviously has drawn attention to concussions in rugby. Can you give us some insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been interesting to me. When you're playing a global sport, I mean, football is so unique. As an old football player, I guess I can say this. Tampa plays Oakland, and we call it the World Championship. And the rest of the world's shaking their head. What are these Yanks up to? But when you really do play in a world sport, you got friends from all over the world, and they say some things like, "Boy, all that padding those gridiron guys are wearing." You go, "Really? Hard plastic weaponry, just padding all of a sudden?" So our sports have just been so different. I mean, there's no blocking in the sport of rugby. So Ronnie's example of that blindside hit, not only is that a penalty, that's a red card. You're done for the day. You're done for the next few weeks. If the video looks bad, you might be done for the season on something like that. So, you take out blocking and getting earhold, that changes some things. And of course, we've always had a lot of rules around tackling in our sport: high tackles, non-wrap tackles. We teach a different technique. We teach a technique that's probably closer to a martial arts technique. It ties your lower body to your upper body, and your head is up and to the behind, and there's no head in the numbers. It's an entirely different technique. I won't give up their names, but my phone rings every once in a while now, and there's a Division I, very famous football coach on the other end of the line that says, "We got to learn about tackling because we just can't keep running into each other." And part of it is, we don't have a down and distance component. So, I mean, I almost said a meter. A yard matters. A half a yard matters, of course, in gridiron football. So that promotes collisions. In our sport, as you get close to the goal line matters. So all of a sudden, maybe there is every inch is fought for differently. But in open play, it's get the guy on the ground. It's tackle him. And tackling well, miss a tackle, you lose some friends on the team. You just don't miss tackles in our sport. So running into each other is just prioritized differently. And I'm happy to say that there's more signs. And we're pretty lucky at Cal, right? I mean, we're in a situation where I get a list every day, and every athlete on the team has a status next to their name. It's all pretty clear. Full. You're going to get him today, right? Out. You won't even be dressed, right? Limited. He probably has a prescribed set of activities he can do and cannot do. He can run, but no contact, 0. And then a great status, I think, we refer to as able. Because that's probably an athlete coming back from injury. That athlete knows their body better than anyone knows their body. And they know, I'm going to do this activity and I'm not going to do that activity. Or maybe I'm going to do this activity, but I'm going to do fewer reps than the other guys are going to do as I start to incorporate myself back in. So we're in a situation where, that situation, that go-no decision is outside of my hands. And it's in the hands of medical professionals, and that's where it should be, in my view. So different sports, I think we've been ahead of this a little bit. In one of the earlier presentations today, they were talking about that period of time after the turn of the century where we had a lot of deaths in American football, and that was good for the rugby business. I mean, I'm sorry for the people that perished, but we went back to playing rugby full-time in front of 50,000 people on the Stanford and the Cal campuses, and it was a big heyday for our sport. And I think there's a lot of people that believe that football's got a lot of work to do right now. They've got a lot of work to do with moms and dads, and they better get busy doing it, or I think what we're going to see is young people are going to migrate to other activities that have better mitigated some of these physical risks.
I spent a morning at a local high school recently during a football practice, and they spent at least 45 minutes on proper tackling technique. And I was really, really grateful to see that. While somebody is thinking of the next question, Jack, you talked about culture, and PCA really is about changing the culture. I'd love that. I want to say something about culture from my standpoint. I'd love for you to talk about it. We really think culture is where the solution really is. Culture is the way we do things here. And Edgar Schein, who is like the academic father of organizational culture studies, he said the only thing of real importance that leaders do is to create and manage culture. And then he goes on to talk about how strategy is important, but strategy is trumped by the culture. And Peter Drucker, who, the management guru, I actually just found this quote yesterday. He said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have the greatest strategy, and if you've got a sloppy culture, that you're not going to be able to implement that. And you can have a subpar strategy, and if you've got a great culture, you can make it work. I'd love for you to say something about culture and how you feel about your team.
Well, I think one of the things that the BCA does great is they put definitions behind things. So we, at some point, we're all working off the same glossary. So when somebody says on my team, when somebody says leadership, we say it's the ability to make those around you better and more productive. It's an ability. You don't inherit it. No one bestows it upon you when you become the captain or the senior or the star player. It's an ability to make those around you better and more productive, full stop. So I think what happens when you see entities, in business, in sport, that have really strong cultures is that when there's a dialogue going on, they're all thinking the same thing when words are used. I mean, we go in the bookstore, and there's 40 meters of books on leadership, and they all make sense, and it all is right, and we use the word all day long, and we went around the room today and said, what's leadership? We get 30 people in, we get 30 different answers, and they'd all be right, and we wonder, well, what do you hear when I say that? So I think one of the things that an embedded culture gives us is just a way to do business, a way to transactionally process business and decisions and behaviors and how we deal with success and failure. And it becomes critically important, I think, that organizations know what they believe in, and everyone on the team is singing the same tune, right? And it becomes. I've been speaking a little bit on this lately, but we're very conditional, is what really good sports teams, really good businesses are. We're not unconditional. We're highly, highly conditional. There's a way that we do business here, and everyone does it that way. We contribute to the middle, or there's probably a better team for you somewhere else. And that's what I see.
One more question here.
Two related questions. One of you mentioned that we tolerate more from coaches than we do from math teachers. My wife and I are both classroom teachers and frequently remark on that, and we've always been puzzled about that. We've always said, if somebody in the classroom spoke to their students in the way that we see coaches speak to their athletes, they would be out. A related question is prompted by our observation, or what we've heard frequently said, that coaches coach men's or boys' teams can get away with more than coaches or coaching girls or women's teams because boys and men can take it better than women. So we've always felt a little concerned about that. So I'm wondering if you could comment on either or both of those.
I think some of the toughest coaches I've ever seen have been female coaches. And I don't say it in a bad way. I mean, I think they've been demanding of their athletes, and I think they've been well inside the boundaries of what's acceptable and best practice. And so, I don't know. I mean, I do hear that gender thing from time to time, but I think that young female athletes and young male athletes, they both have dreams and aspirations. They both want to get there. The technique changes probably a little bit. I don't have a lot of experience in coaching females, but I got to believe at some point, they both want to get there. And I think we overplay those gender differences. And just for the record, I wasn't very good in math, and I thought my math teacher was a bit abusive, just in some
We're going to wrap this up here. Thanks for the great questions. I do want to say one thing. I think there's a misconception about boys versus girls, and the idea is that boys are tougher at some level than girls are, and so they can be screamed at, and girls might start crying. Boys inside them they have an emotional tank that needs to be filled. And if you want to get the best out of them, just like you want to get the best out of girls, you got to fill that emotional tank. You got to look for the things they're doing right and recognize them for that. Sometimes then you have to have hard conversations. It's not happy talk. But when you fill somebody, we talk about the magic ratio, 5 positives for every negative. When you're looking for the things that kids are doing right and they're getting their tank filled, and now you need to have a conversation with them. I'm not getting the effort I need from you. They can handle that. Last comment, we said from the beginning, this is not just positive coaching mindset movement is not just about getting coaches to be a little more positive. It's about changing the mental model of coaches away from a win-at-all-cost mentality to I am a character educator. If we can get coaches to see themselves differently, to see themselves as double goal coaches, yes, I'm winning. I need to win. I want my players to win. But I'm also concerned about the character development of my players. Then we win. Let's give Jack Clark a big hand.
And Jim Thompson.
Okay, I'd like to